Released the same year as its full-size counterpart, this camera went on to become a favorite of amateur and professional photographers. Let's take a look at it. By the mid-1970s, there was a demand for smaller 35mm cameras, and that was, of course, led by Olympus and its OM1. But clearly, the writing was on the wall for full-size 35mm SLRs. Nikon joined the pack and was among those that offered a scaled-down, yet full-featured camera. Nikon's first entry into this market was with the FM. This proved to be an extremely popular camera, selling millions of models as it looked to attract a different segment. And that would be the newer photographer looking for something that was full-featured yet not full-size. The FM was introduced in 1977. Ironically, that was also the same year that Nikon produced the FT3. Obviously, buyers went for the FM because FT3 production lasted just 1 year, while the FM was made from 1977 through 1982, but then gave rise to several other models, including the FM2. I want to say it was the FM2. Let's look it up here real quick. Yes, the FM2 and FM3A. That would be in 2001, and also there were automatic versions of this same camera. And the automatic version, of course, was the original FE and then the FE2. So what's to like about this camera? Let's do a real quick size comparison with the FT3. So you can see how the FM appears to be a smaller camera, and in fact it is. Let's put them side by side. And it's somewhat shorter, right? Somewhat shorter. It's not appreciably shorter, but it is somewhat shorter. Shoulder to shoulder, as we say. Here you can really begin to see the difference. So the FT3 is certainly wider, and interestingly enough, the body is thicker. Remember, in order to maintain compatibility, backward compatibility with its line of Nikkor lenses dating back to the 1960s, I would imagine, the film plane to lens flange distance had to remain identical. So you can see in this comparison how the FM is thinner. So in order to compensate and provide that same film plane to lens flange distance, it had to make this mirror box extend out slightly. See, it's very thin here, but it's much thicker on this side. Well, let's compare the weight of the two cameras. So the Nikon FM comes in at 1 pound 12 ounces. Yeah, 1 pound 12 ounces, 12.5 ounces. And this comes in at 2 pounds 3 ounces. So that's significantly more. 12.4, that's 7 ounces more. And so once again, while 7 ounces might not seem like a lot, tote that around for a couple of hours. Let's talk about what made this camera so popular. Well, first of all, it was an ideal size. Not too large, not too small. Definitely not too small. All the controls fall exactly where they should be. Your thumb is here, shutter release is here. This had a locking collar. It would lock the shutter release. That would be if you had wound the camera onto the next frame and you were ready to take a photo, you could lock the shutter release. That way you wouldn't accidentally release the shutter, for example, while taking the camera out of the bag. Remember, in those days, film, there was also always a finite number of photos or frames on each roll of film, so you would want to be as judicious as possible and only take photos when you intended to. Shutter speeds ran from 1/1000th of a second down to 1 second plus B. This is your film speed dial. To change your film speed, you would lift the outer ring and turn it. This is a small little, what they call film reminder holder. So you would tear off the end of the box of the film, slide it in here. That way you always knew what type of film you had loaded into the camera. So, for example, on mine, you can really tell that I'm old because this one has Kodacolor 2 and 36 exposures. What was this? ISO 100. and this was a 400 speed film, Ilford HP5. Someday I'll talk about film. I never had as much luck with HP5 as I did Tri-X. The FM was actually a very handsome camera, had this leather covering atop the pentaprism, had a very nice leatherette covering on the body, even in the self-timer had a small circular piece embedded there, and across the back. Like most Nikon cameras, it put the model number as part of the preceding the serial number on the back of the camera. On the bottom, there was a provision to take I think it was the MD11 and MD12 motor drive electrical contacts. Here's the physical contact with the motor drive. So there was no, some of the cameras had a little circular plate that you had to unscrew, little cover, much like the battery cover. And then you would take that little cover, and usually there was a place on the drive to slot it in there and hold it. But this, you just physically connected it. The MD11 and MD12, I had an MD12 for a while, and I believe it shot at 3.5 frames per second. So that means you could burn through a roll of 36 in about 10 seconds. In those days, like I said, unless you were shooting sports or action photography, you tended not to shoot film at that furious rate. Just because you would then, after 10 seconds, have to then change your roll of film. So the purpose of this small silver button right here is for multiple exposures. That is, if you wanted to take more than one photo on a frame, you would use this button. So how it works is you pull out the film to its standoff. This is known as its standoff position. Then you would pull this to the left or push it to the left, depending on what works easiest for you, and move the film advance. So what happens is it tensions the shutter without advancing the film. And I can show you that by opening the camera. See how that rotates at the same time? So when you pull this to the side, you'll notice it doesn't move. So the idea is that you can tension the shutter without moving the film, and then you can take one or more exposures on the same frame. This was a single stroke mechanism, not multi-stroke, so that means you had to wind the film all in one stroke. Although you could let it go, but you see it doesn't ratchet. So you would, if you were advancing the film, it would then continue on from where you had left off. To open the back, there's a small lever here, which you would push toward the back of the camera. Push toward the back while pulling up on the rewind knob. Actually, pushing this allows you to pull up on the rewind knob. Otherwise, the rewind knob doesn't lift. So pull that toward the back, lift up the rewind knob, pull it. Again, keep pulling it away from the body, and the back pops open. In the back, we find, well, once again, we have the pressure plate. And of course, the role of the pressure plate is to keep the film flat against the film rails. These are the film rails, and your film runs along them onto the take-up spool. This is your roll 35. This is where your roll 35 millimeter film would go, and it would be fed here. This is a small knurled wheel, to help you get the film loaded. This uses a vertically traveling metal focal plane shutter. And as I mentioned, this would be mechanically controlled, not electronically controlled. This uses 2 button cell batteries, either S76 or LR44. I believe there's an LR44 times 2, X2, which would be 2 batteries in 1 cell. In any case, always use either silver oxide or lithium in your cameras, never alkaline. The batteries power only the meter. It has nothing to do with the shutter. So if your batteries go out, you can still guess on the shutter speed and your aperture, and you'll be fine. This was part of, this of course used Nikon's newer AI auto-indexing lenses. You could mount older lenses, most older lenses. There were probably a couple that you couldn't mount because the rear lens element protruded so deeply into the mirror box that when you took your photo, the mirror would strike the back of the lens, either damaging the mirror or damaging your lens. However, you would know ahead of time. If you bought any of the so-called AI lenses, you'll be fine. If you wanted to mount one of those older lenses, let's say, well, pretty much any lens, you could push this, there's a small button on the side of the mount, push that down, this flips up out of the way, and then you can mount those without a problem. Of course, you're going to have to do, well, this is all manual anyway, but you're going to have to do what's called stop-down metering. To do that, this is your depth of field preview. But for the older lenses, of course, this is how you would achieve that. You would press this and then turn your aperture ring until you would achieve the correct exposure. The Nikon FM does not have mirror lockup. In previous cameras, you could lock up the mirror by, usually there was a small switch or slide on the side or something, but in this case, no. However, if you are using the self-timer, it should lock the mirror up. That should be the first thing it does. See? Mirror goes up. That way, any vibration it will cause by moving that mirror upward will have settled down by the time the shutter releases. So if there ever is an instance in which you need to lock up the mirror, I would use the self-timer because it serves that purpose. Now around this time, and I'm going to cover this camera in a later video, a year later Nikon produced the Nikon FE, which is the automatic version of this camera. And just by looking at it, you can see that it's really the identical camera. Save for this one was automatic, offered automatic exposure, and the Nikon FM was just offered manual exposure. So there are small differences. This has no shutter lock on it. This also requires a battery. It only has 2 speeds should your battery go dead, and that was 1/90th of a second in B. And so this is the reason why pros often carry the FM as a backup body. Even if the battery was dead, you know, let's say they hadn't looked at it for maybe a year and a half, picked it up, it is shooting, the battery's dead, they can still continue to shoot without any concerns. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any suggestions on cameras that you would like to see me review, please let me know in the comments below.